So this past week, I hit 200 episodes of the podcast, and I kind of got thinking about, I'm quite reflective on like, what are some of the things that I've learned through this process? Because, 200 episodes is quite a lot of episodes, right? It's quite a lot of time that's gone into it. It's coming up to, it'll be actually be 4 years in March. So it's coming up to nearly 4 years of podcasting. I've interviewed over 100 people. I've done, probably close to 80 in focus sessions. I've met incredible people. I've gone through change myself. So I thought that it'd be really good to share some of the learnings that I've made over this period of time in these, nearly 4 years. I've tried to identify 3 kind of key areas really, because I feel like there's a long list of stuff. This could be an episode of like 100 learnings or 200 learnings from 200 episodes or something like that. But I don't think anyone's around for 200 learnings. So I've kind of identified 3 learnings that I think have been the most impactful for me over this time. And the learnings that I don't only apply to the podcast, but I apply to kind of just like everyday life. Because to me, it's like, okay, cool, it's good to be able to apply learnings to the podcast and to what I do as a coach and everything else. But how am I actually applying those to my life? So the first one that I wanted to touch on was this idea of being curious, because, when I started the podcast, I would set like a certain amount of questions I wanted to ask, almost a typical kind of interviewee format. And as time's gone on, I've got rid of the questions. I think first of all, the questions were a bit of a safety blanket for me in terms of like just having stuff to ask. But I've got rid of the questions, and I always do my research on the guests, and I always write up a few topics that I want to touch on. And for me, I'd rather let the conversation unfold naturally. And if there's anything that comes up, we'll go there and we'll talk about it. But I think this idea of being curious really helps, because when you approach a conversation or a situation in life or something new or even something old you want to try and understand, approaching it from a place of curiosity really helps you to understand it better. And when I sit down with a guest and we chat, I come from a place of curiosity. Like I want to understand them and how they feel and what they've been through and what they've learned from it, what they've gotten from it, and how they've applied those learnings. And if I can really come from that place of curiosity, it frees me up to explore the different areas of the conversation and the different areas of the way that person's mind works or the way they live their life. And when you apply that to your normal life every day, if you approach with the same curiosity, you can approach your life with a lot more freedom, a lot less judgment on yourself, and you can just be like, oh, I feel like this. That's interesting. I wonder what that could be for, or why, or what caused it. And you can really, take this idea of curiosity to quite an extreme in a good way, and, again, relating it to the podcast, if, like I said, a guest says something that's really interesting, it allows me to dive in a little bit deeper on that subject, taking that one point and going, actually, that's really interesting. Like, why did you feel like that? Or what did you learn from that? Or what did you gain from that? And something else will come out of that. And what happens is when you're curious and you ask why or what else or how was that, there's always something that comes out of the top level thing. So an example could be like, I don't know, you could be talking to someone about their goals. Okay, so what's your goal? My goal is to, let's say release a book. Okay, cool. Why do you want to release a book? Because I want to, I think that my writing has a lot of interesting subjects that I touch on and people can relate to. Okay, what else? Well, I feel like if I share my story, it will help people kind of in their lives, in their day-to-day. Okay, what else? I feel that if I can help people in their day-to-day lives, I can really create an impact for people, and that impact can really, go on to the next person. Okay, what else? And all you're doing is, with that curiosity, is uncovering another layer of learning, uncovering another layer of what is it that person is actually feeling or going through or wants to do. And, I've got this a lot, to be honest, from coaching. It's like, the more curious you are about someone, the more understanding you can be of them, the more you can help them to understand what it is they're trying to work towards or achieve or transform, whatever it may be. And this real sense of of curiosity helps to learn, really. It helps to ask genuine questions. It helps to kind of be interested in hearing the answers to what someone has to say, rather than it being like, okay, well, the next question I wanted to ask is da 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 da. And it's like when you approach a conversation with a friend or whatever, like if you approach with a curiosity about what it is they're doing or they're feeling or why or how, like it just opens up the door a lot more to a certain amount of space that you probably wouldn't have reached in the first place. So I think that the idea of curiosity is one that's really been powerful for me with the podcast. It's like when I'm approaching guests, I approach it from a place of curiosity as well. It's like, who is someone that I find interesting? Why do I find them interesting? And if it's something that really touches me, or they're working on a project that really touches me, I want to talk to them about it. I want to hear about it. I want to hear why, what inspired that. And that place of curiosity is really an interesting place to be. And I try to live a lot more of my life in that space of curiosity, because it removes, like I said, the fears, the worries, the judgment, the negativity that we put around stuff. It removes a lot of that. So I think that's kind of been the one really big learning out of the podcast. The second one kind of ties in, I guess, now that I'm thinking about it. It ties in quite a lot, because it comes down to listening. And it's like the power we have of listening, like within us. I think we underestimate the power of listening, and we forget. We've got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And it's like we should listen more and talk less, particularly when speaking with other people, which is more often than not when we're going to be listening, right? And what I've learned through this idea of listening is like, when you can truly hold space for someone in a non-judgmental way. Again, it's taking that touch of curiosity, completely non-judgmentally, adding that little bit of curiosity in. You really allow them to talk deeply about what they're feeling or what they're passionate about. Don't get me wrong, we can all talk about our passions in a really big way. It's so easy to talk about the things you're passionate about. In fact, it's probably one of the easiest things we can do in life. Someone says to you, okay, what's something you're really passionate about? Oh man, I love football. Okay, why do you love football? And it's so easy to just talk about that subject, which is why, again, a lot of guys will end up, when they meet for the first time, talking about football, because it's just a really easy, relatable point that you can have a conversation around. But when you truly hold the space for someone and you apply really deep listening, you actually allow them the space to open up themselves into. You allow them the space to talk. You allow them the space to understand what it is they're really trying to say, and you can really understand what they're trying to say. A lot of the time when we're having a conversation with someone, what we're doing inside our minds is we are already preparing the answer that or the next question that we want to say. We're preparing it in our mind. Okay, they're talking about this, then maybe I can throw this in as a comment, or I can do this, But what we should do instead is actually the opposite. We should just listen. Forget what you want to say next. Just listen to what the person's saying. And if you do throw in that little touch of curiosity, the next question will come to you from that place of curiosity. So listening is a really important art. And again, I guess this is something that I've learned a lot from coaching, is that when you allow someone to be open and you allow that space for them to speak non-judgmentally, it really creates something powerful, and it really creates an interesting conversation. And when I apply that to just life in general, it's like sitting more in a listening position rather than talking. I guess it's something that I've always done in life. I've never really been like the person who wants to be at the front of the room or the head of the table talking to everyone and being the life and soul of the party. I've always been the listener, the watcher, the person who's trying to, understand what people are talking about. But when you truly listen to someone to understand what they're saying, instead of listening so that you can reply, you have a completely different conversation. And that's when you get to explore more vulnerable sides to people. That's when you get to explore the more interesting sides. That's when you get to have a more open conversation. And if you can come from that place of openness within yourself, that conversation can be really powerful. And I think there's a moment within the podcast, I wouldn't be able to put an episode number on it, but probably within the sort of first 30 to 50 episodes, something clicked in me of like, actually, put the notepad aside, take the questions out, and let's just listen to what this person has to say. And the conversations from there on have really changed. They've really taken a different shape, which it kind of leads me really nicely actually onto the third thing that I've learned through these 200 episodes is like the power of evolution. Like the podcast for me has always been like an extension of myself, right? When I started the podcast, it was about trying to inspire people, trying to motivate people to follow their passions, because that's what I was trying to do in my own life. So the podcast became like a reflection of me, like an extension of me. And at first, I was kind of trying to really stick to that format. But as I've gone through this journey of like listening more and being more open and more curious, not just with the podcast, but within my own life, change has naturally occurred within my life in terms of like some of the things that I believe in. You know, I read and believe a lot more kind of like spiritual type books, or like spiritual psychology, or just psychology in general, or, you know, whatever it may be. It's not purely just personal development and mindset stuff anymore like it was when I first started. So as my learnings have sort of grown around my life, the podcast has gone with it. And I used to be scared about the change. I used to be scared about the identity I had around the podcast and what it meant and what it stood for. But as I started to go through this journey, this is probably like around early 2019, I started to explore different areas. I then, came up with the idea of rebranding the podcast, which is something that I'd done, this year in I think April time. And that was really scary to me, because I was like, oh no, but people identify me and the podcast as Dreamer's Disease, which is what was the original name. But when I decided to rebrand it, I wanted to come up with a name that really encapsulated what the podcast was about and what I'm about, which is, as the name suggests, is living in the moment and being really present with your life. And once I let go of this idea of the identity I had around the podcast and around myself and around my beliefs, it really allowed me to step into this evolution of me, which allowed the podcast to come with it. Because like I said, the podcast has always been an extension of myself. So to do that and to really step into it, it was quite scary. But doing it helps me explore different areas. Like if I'm feeling a certain way, for example, I'm not scared to bring that into the conversation. Whereas before I was so caught up in this idea of like, every conversation has to be perfect. Every conversation has to be groundbreaking. Every conversation has to be like a piece of art in a way, right? But removing that element of like chasing the perfection in the conversation and just being more open and honest and bringing my learnings into the conversations, it's really helped those conversations evolve. It's really helped the conversations to come from a space where you're just able to talk one-on-one with someone, as if the microphones and the recordings and the cameras weren't there. And I think that's really powerful. Again, we don't allow ourselves to do that in our lives. We define ourselves by who we are and the things that we believe and the way that we've always been. We don't allow ourselves to remove those ideas, those concepts, because that's all they are. They're ideas, they're concepts that we've built, stories that we've built around ourselves in our minds of who we are and how we should be. When you remove those things, those stories, those ideas, those concepts, you really start to open up more of yourself, and that's when you start to evolve. That's when you start to grow. That's the place where transformation really comes from. And you look at like a caterpillar. It's a really great example, right? A caterpillar is a little bug thing with loads of legs that sort of crawls around the floor. If they were so consumed by this idea of being a caterpillar, they would never go into building their cocoon so that they can evolve into the butterfly, because they'd be so identified as the caterpillar. No, I can't be this flying insect. I'm this bug that crawls around on the floor, and I have this long body and lots of legs. But when they go into the cocoon, that's when they're shedding these stories, these concepts, these ideas of what they are and how they're showing up in the world, and they come out of this as this beautiful butterfly instead. And it's the same for us. When we can drop the stories, when we can drop the ideas, the concepts, the blocks that we put in place in our lives, we can allow ourselves the space to grow and evolve and become something even more beautiful than we were before. And I think that's been the biggest learning for me of the podcast, is not being scared to bring you guys as the listeners and myself and the podcast as a platform on the journey with me that I'm on. Like, it doesn't have to be this thing that's stuck in a certain way. Like, it can change. Like, I've changed so much. It can be flexible, it can be dynamic, and that's what I love. It's a platform to have those conversations. It's a platform to inspire, to learn, to hear from people, to connect with people, to see how you can apply those learnings in your lives. And I think that's a really powerful thing. So they're kind of like the three areas really that I've wanted to share with you guys on what I feel I've learned really powerfully and impactfully through having this podcast, through these 200 episodes. But I'd love to hear what you've got from this episode, or, you know, not just this episode. If you've listened to a few of the podcasts, the interviews, or the Invoker sessions, I'd love to know what you've got from that. I'd love to know what two major learnings that you've made for yourself through listening to the podcast, or even just this episode. So to do that, just hit me up on Instagram at I am Alex Manzi, or you can hit me up on TikTok, Alex Manzi Coaching, and let me know what those learnings are. I'd love to hear from you, and I'd love to share more of my own learnings.